This might be my favorite showdown of the year. The Velvet is a gorgeous phone and represents LG's mainstream focus well. It's feature-rich and supports some really cool accessories to expand it beyond normal phone use. But as a platform, the Velvet is also LG's most varied phone of the year. Different markets, regions, and carriers are getting different flavors. So when T-Mobile announces the Velvet with a non-Qualcomm processor, we should all be very curious. There's no way to talk about this without getting a little nerdy, so let's jump in. To support 5G, the main flavor of Velvet uses a mid-range Snapdragon 765 from Qualcomm. The T-Mobile variant uses a Dimensity 1000C from MediaTek. Now, MediaTek has kind of a mediocre rep in the tech community. Their best chips can't compete with Qualcomm's best chips. But if we're savvy techies and not just benchmark junkies, then we should care more about price performance, not just top-tier performance. And there, the T-Mobile version of the Velvet is just plain better. Let's look at some numbers. In a synthetic bench, the single core numbers are really close with a minor edge going to the MediaTek. Multi-core performance shows a slightly larger lead over the Qualcomm, but the real deal is in GPU performance. The MediaTek posts double the GPU numbers of the Qualcomm. That puts the Dimensity 1000C much closer to a Snapdragon 845 from 2 years ago. Qualcomm's current mid-range can't quite compete with a premium processor from 2 years ago, but the MediaTek can. Of course, synthetic benchmarks aren't the whole story. In some real-world tests, we can see that performance delta narrow way down between the two. We'd want to see two phones of the same name perform roughly the same. Right, Samsung? I don't know where that came from. When it comes to gaming, the T-Mobile Velvet is consistently faster at launching and loading games, but in-game, with the apps I can measure, the lead is smaller than Geekbench would indicate. I can see about a 10 to 15% lead in Bright Ridge, comparing similar graphic settings. I honestly wouldn't be able to claim there's a noticeable difference in general UI behavior, but when we look at some heavier lifting tests like Uhd Video Rendering, it's not even close. My 1-minute UHD video rendering test takes the Qualcomm around 3.5 minutes to finish. The T-Mobile Velvet did it in just over 2 minutes. The longer transcode test is broken on the Qualcomm flavor of the phone. It can finish the test, but it takes 13 minutes to complete. I definitely don't think that's an accurate assessment of what the 765 can do. I think LG needs to tweak some of this software. As a comparison point, a Pixel 4a can finish the transcode in just over 5 minutes. The T-Mobile Velvet finishes that in 3.5. Now, performance is one thing, but we get different chipsets, and that means differences for audio and camera performance too. I'm really happy to see LG courageously maintain headphone jacks, and the audio performance is similar. General sound stage, the noise floor, the signal-to-noise performance, and the amp output, very close between these two, but the Qualcomm will take an edge for a little less distortion. I think you'd be hard-pressed to hear a difference on streaming audio services, but the Qualcomm does take an edge. Ditto camera performance, they feel really similar. I was hoping the Dimensity would include 4K video at 60 frames per second. The processor page, MediaTek says it can support that, but LG hasn't enabled that on the T-Mobile Velvet. But there are some differences in photo processing. In general, they feel about the same, but color reproduction is a little warmer and ruddier on the T-Mobile version. Output is a bit cooler with a slightly greener tint on the Qualcomm. They both push a more vibrant HDR look. Both camera apps are smooth in operation, just with different chipsets, we end up with different post-processing. I think both will serve the mission well if the point is to make consumer-friendly social media-ready images as easy as possible. But in terms of fine detail and clarity working this larger 48 megapixel sensor, I hope we do see a little software tweaking on the MediaTek flavor of this phone. Depending on your lighting, especially in higher contrast situations, there can almost be a bit of a beauty filter applied to some of the photos, where I can maintain some of the texture of a stucco wall on the Qualcomm version of the phone. It might get a bit smoothed out on the MediaTek. And getting down to the battery, I don't run the most detailed battery benchmarks. My general use on both phones, the Qualcomm handset had a slight lead in my video streaming test, but I don't know how to extrapolate that out to a fair real world to real world comparison. The international version of the Velvet doesn't work on T-Mobile 5G, and that's kind of a key comparison point to judge daily driver battery life. Showing you screen on time numbers when this phone is on LTE and this phone is on 5G isn't really an oranges to oranges comparison. But getting down to it, the main difference isn't actually on the phone. While the Dimensity lists support for dual display hardware, it currently doesn't work with the dual screen case for the international Velvet. We might need to use a specific dual screen case for T-Mobile's version. All the rest of what makes the Velvet a flexible platform is still here, like memory card expansion. We still get awesome stylus support, making this a Note-like competitor. So here's the weirdness. The T-Mobile version of the Velvet is the most powerful version of the Velvet, and it's often the cheapest, looking at the different carrier options. What's encouraging, though, is seeing more processor competition in North America. Companies like Qualcomm have no reason to work harder on improvements if they have a monopoly over a certain tech sector. Like, we can take this back to Intel versus AMD. It's nice to see another player in this phone space offering strong price performance options. This all gets way more interesting with more competition. As always, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, subscribing to the channel. Supporting your favorite content creators has never been more critical than it is today. So I greatly appreciate all of you who do check out the links in the description below or check out my merch. That's always kind of fun. There's the support page on SomeGadgetGuy.com for a current list of all of my partnerships and affiliates, or you might consider joining the list of names currently scrolling by from my Patreon. Patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. That's basically a list of all the coolest people on the internet, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the web, at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next video.